The approaches in philanthropy is still very much so, you poor people come beg me for money, as opposed to understanding, no, we have too much resources based on privilege and power. We need to partner with institutions and support them in ways that are effective given our resources.
Welcome to Natural Collisions, brought to you by COAC Detroit. Conversations about the challenges and opportunities in the nonprofit sector, highlighting the voices in nonprofit work in Detroit and Southeast Michigan, and beyond. I'm your host, Charnae Sanders, Program Manager at COAC Detroit. In today's Natural Collisions conversation, we are diving deeper into the funding side for our Fund Well series. This is part 2 of a series of episodes focused on the importance of funding well-being for nonprofit leaders and teams. The colliders for this conversation all play an important role in supporting the well-being of the communities they serve. Our guests understand the need to elevate the importance of healthy nonprofit work environments in the sector that prioritizes well-being. And they all put their money where their mouth is. Our guests this month are Asia Blaney.
My name is Asia Blaney. I am one of the grants program managers for COAC, and I've been mostly working with the Well Fund.
Lily Salas.
My name is Lily Salas. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a community investment officer at the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, and we are a local foundation that provides funding here in the county of Kalamazoo to mobilize people and resources, and also offer scholarships.
Terry E. Whitfield.
Hi, my name is Terry Whitfield. I am a partnership manager on the policy and systems team at the Skillman Foundation. Skillman Foundation is a philanthropic organization, 60 years in Detroit, focused on improving the outcomes of Detroit's young people, now focused on supporting an equitable education system through the vehicle of community organizing and policy and systems advocacy.
Yolo Akili Robinson.
My name is Yolo Akili Robinson. Pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the executive director and founder of BEAM, the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective. BEAM is a training institution that trains Black and exploited communities on how to create community-based systems of care around mental health and healing, as well as a grant-making institution that supports institutions and collectives around resourcing and funding their efforts and work.
Let's jump right in. On Natural Collisions, we love to hold space for our guests to share their perspectives. We ask each to speak on what wellness means to them, personally, professionally, and for their communities.
I don't mind starting off. So for me, wellness is about having good physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, all of that kind of health. But I think it means having kind of an abundance of it. I think a lot of times, especially in our work, we're like, okay, I can handle it, I can do that, and we push ourselves. And I'm not saying that you can't push yourself, that you can't work harder, but I think that there should be a limit. And I think that being able to have an overabundance of health, having an overabundance of capacity is kind of like central to health, whether that means your personal health or your organizational health. I really think like capacity is very much central, especially to the organization, especially to us as BIPOC-led nonprofits, because I feel like we love to support our communities, and sometimes we do that at our own expense. And so I really hope that for all of us, that for all BIPOC-led nonprofits, that people are taking care of their health and doing what they need to do to make sure that they have the capacity to continue giving support to their communities.
I agree, Aisha, and just kind of going off of what you're saying, I think there should be space for joy in wellness. And I love that you mentioned abundance, because I do often feel that when I was in a surviving mode, I thought I was doing well. But then when I actually was able to tap into thriving, then I truly understood what wellness meant. And so I really love that abundance component of wellness.
The part that I'll pick up off of Lily and Asia is around the idea around mindset. like mindness, our wellness is so rooted in how we think, how we view ourselves, how we view our situations. What's the statement? Life is 10% what happens and 90% how you react to it. And a lot of that reaction is baked off of how we are viewing the situation and really the health of our mindset. You know, if we can move from using an asset frame, really focusing on the sunny side of things, to quote the Joker from Dark Knight. The more that we can focus on, you know, the positives of the situation, it lends itself to, I believe, that abundance thinking and abundance way of being all around, physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually. So how we start and how we view the world goes a long way to, I think, supporting our own particular wellness. And I think through the organization, the ability to provide resources and supports that help to help BIPOC leaders create the space for them to do the development that they need for themselves, for the staff, and whether or not that is physical, mental, emotional wellness, it is incumbent upon philanthropy or those with resources to support BIPOC-led organizations so that they can really step into their greatness from a space that is really rooted in, you know, mental stability and mental wellness.
Yeah, I love everyone's responses. When I think of wellness, I think of what I have experienced as an intentional framework cultivated to divert away from the ways in which structural capitalism, policy, and advocacy actually fosters mental health distress. Wellness is often individualized. It is often puts the pressure on communities that have been exploited to address it, as opposed to recognizing that the mental health of Black, of Latinx, of Indigenous communities is directly an output of the fact that our rent is not affordable, of food apartheid spaces throughout our world, right? And I think that what I struggle with in my work is holding that, right? Holding that it's important for us to look at the structural systems and the policy and advocacy that created this kind of communities of unwellness, and also recognize that we can be individual and collective actors to resist that. But if we don't put the onus on these systems, then, and which the systems are very invested in making it, oh yeah, you do yoga. You just need to do yoga. There's something wrong with you and your mental health. Not something wrong with the fact you don't have clean water. Not something wrong with the fact that you have a lower living wage. And so now you have the anxiety upon you about survival every day, which creates a compounded stress on other health conditions. And so I think about wellness in that context and how it's been used against us. Often I see a lot of times in Black and Brown communities, it's like, you know, you see sometimes programs that are just like almost like shaming, like you just need to be well and you need to eat something better. Well, there's something in my neighborhood to eat. I don't have the money for that. I don't have the time for that, the energy. And it shames the individual as opposed to saying your circumstances are about intergenerational policy and structural choices that were made in your community and your neighborhood, right? And so I think about that also in my leadership. It's like, how can I as an institution make institutional structures and policies that cultivate the wellness of the staff? They're beyond me, right? And so that's something I think about when I think about wellness in that context. Because while it can be a beautiful thing, it also comes with a lot of history of a lot of like, you know, individualism and hyper capitalism that isn't healthy for our communities, or helpful for our communities.
I was just going to say, I really agree. And especially the needs, because people's needs need to be met in order to have an overabundance of things. Because like you said, like you can do yoga until you can turn into a pretzel and do a backflip. But if you haven't paid rent, if you don't have money to eat, like you're not going to have wellness because you have all these other things that you have to worry about, all these other things on your plate that you have to do.
I mean, it comes down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if your baseline needs are not being met, how could you truly be expected to lift up to the higher reaches of like wellness? It's not possible. So I appreciate, Yolo, you kind of bringing it back to what's the root cause that keeps our society in this lack perspective. It's really through this individualized, it's your fault that you're not feeling well versus what are the systemic conditions that are contributing to this lack of wellness that we're seeing.
Absolutely. The only other piece I would add, and I loved the piece on the systemic component to wellness, is that our families, our communities are also important to our individual wellness, right? That sense of collectiveness. And so if they're also not well, then it impacts us ultimately too. And so, yeah, systemic overview is important.
Yeah, and one piece I just want to lift up too, as we even talk about using the language of well and wellness, many disability justice scholars, many like Black and brown disabled folks will talk about how wellness is often used as weaponized against them, right? If you are autistic, if you are depressed, how wellness can be used as this tool to say something, once again, individualize it, make it about you, but not actually creating a needs-based system to saying, my depression is actually adaptive, right? If I was me actually having this symptomology in a world that's creating these conditions is actually a sign that I'm alive. If I was not experiencing some of these depression, some of the anxiety, then it would actually be more of a problem, a question, because our bodies and nervous systems respond to the external stimuli, right? So some of that is adaptive. And so I think even thinking about that framing, that sometimes these words, because sometimes wellness often means this image of perfection wellness, which we also got to pull apart. Like what does it look like for you, Lily, and Asia, and what it looks different for all of us. It's about our individual equilibrium, right? And what might look like wellness for me or equilibrium for me, Lily, you might be like, that's a lot, YOLO, that ain't me, right? So understanding those distinctions too.
Funding wellness requires an understanding of distinctions. And to understand, we must listen. So I wanted to offer our guests the space to air out some of the present day challenges to creating healthy work environments and cultures that prioritize rest and wellness. And this time, specifically for Black and brown or BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations, so we can all listen.
I think part of what really spurred the Skillman Foundation and the idea to partner with COACT around the Well Fund is that many of our partners, many of the grants that the foundation would give would be programmatic in nature. So it really did not allow for a lot of flexibility to adapt and adjust those resources to meet the non-programmatic needs that very much are centered to being able to really show up for your kids. So in the midst of the pandemic and everyone feeling this inordinate and extreme amount of stress, what did it mean for staff to be able to have access to a wellness coach or to be able to identify a spa day for the staff? But really, once we came out of that kind of this idea around how do you provide programmatic wellness, really what it showed the foundation is that wellness starts at the top. And if the leaders of BIPOC organizations that are many times underfunded, under-resourced, many times those leaders see the issue that they're looking to solve and they jump to solve that issue without resources, without supports, and many times without the guarantee that if I get a grant this year, I know I'll get a grant next year. It places an undue amount of stress and strain on those leaders, which then leads to burnout, which then leads to a lot of other factors that inhibits their ability to truly show up for the mission that they are out to create. So I think through the Well Fund, the goal was, how do you create a pot of dollars that are truly aimed at supporting the overall wellness of the leader and give them the resources to then put those dollars in the spaces and places that can best support themselves and their staff and the community in which they serve.
Yeah, and I would point to meritocracy as one of the challenges, the belief that you have to work hard and you have to hustle and you have to go above and beyond and do all the things. And oftentimes there isn't a conversation about rest. Like rest is okay, scheduling rest is important to restore your body, your mind. And then in some spaces, especially when the nonprofits are short-staffed, right? When they don't have as many resources, then it feels like there is no time to take that rest, because if you do, then it comes at the cost of your clients or the people that you're serving. And so that culture of rest, creating that culture of rest in a workplace is important, but it can be a challenge. And in this year, I have heard of nonprofits that are establishing like a 36-hour work week and they don't work Friday afternoons, or that they'll close for a week in the summer and a week in the winter. And they're doing it as an organization so that everybody has the opportunity to disconnect, and they have, put other things in place. They have planned for a contingency, a plan B, so that they are able to create that space for rest.
I have a couple of thoughts about how dysregulation and unwellness are cultivated by the nonprofit industrial complex. And I think that it hits upon something that Terry shared earlier, is that we have far too many foundations and philanthropic institutions, creating frameworks that they expect people on the ground to integrate their work into, not understanding that you aren't doing the work and you're not here in the hood. So it's actually not helpful for me to try to figure out how to map myself into your very privileged and elite perspective and ideology. And so that creates a unique challenge and a pressure on, I call it plantation philanthropy. It's this kind of approach where it's like, I'm going to go to Asia, who was overworked, and I'm going to have you fill out this entire big 30-page grant. Now, I know you also in the streets support people with gun violence and all kinds of trauma, while I'm in my lily white office somewhere in the 30th floor. And when it could be an actual more helpful modality for me to say, you know what? I'm going to have a conversation with you and I'm going to have somebody record it. I'm going to take notes and write what I hear you saying. I'm going to produce something that I'm going to send it to you and you review it, right? The approach in philanthropy is still very much so, you poor people come beg me for money, as opposed to understanding, no, we have too much resources based on privilege and power. We need to partner with institutions and support them in ways that are effective given our resources. One of the things we do with our grant making, it's a small thing, but it's been really wild to me how people have been so touched by it. When we do our grant applications, and if you make it to the end of the first interview round after we kind of review the paper applications, we pay you a stipend for your time, right? It's just $150. And we have had our applicants really break down crying and shock they're getting money, because Black and brown folks, people who are doing work supporting our communities, are so used to being under-resourced and disrespected about our time. Now, if this was a larger, big philanthropy foundation, nobody would question that you need to be paid for your consult time and conversation. But for some reason, the plantation philanthropy approach is very much so still like, you're lucky I'm even talking to you. Your time isn't even worth being paid for. You're not that valuable in that way until I deem you valuable by giving you this, right? And so I think some of those approaches are really problematic. I think it was Letty who said something about program, or maybe it was Asia, about program grants versus general operating grants. That's huge too, right? I've intentionally sought out general operating grants, give us the flexibility to be malleable and to respond to our community's needs, not the vision of someone who's in the foundation who does not understand what it's like in the hood here doing the work, who's like, this makes more sense to me in my elite position, right? And that is a big problem of what creates so much distress on top of the internalized capitalism. And the last thing I will say too, there also be some right sizing that we have to do in our nonprofits. When I say right sizing, when we need to really think about how we think about work. I think in the meritocracy, as Lily was sharing, about if I have a three staff organization, does my labor reflect that I have 3 staff, or does it reflect that I have 15 staff? What needs to be cut and rearranged and reimagined? And how can we focus on quality, doing sharp, really good work, as opposed to feeling like we got to pump out all these things, 100 things a year, which are subpar, sub-engagement, sub-quality, as opposed to refining our work. And so I think that is what a lot of nonprofits I see struggling with. It's like, you're trying to do so much, do what you do well, do less well, and see how that can impact, the nature of the work.
Just to piggy up back off of that, I agree. I think there's like a lot of what is it called? The dog and pony show. I talked about that in one of my meetings yesterday, where some foundations, they want these organizations to do a little dance for them and to showcase somebody that they helped and put them up here and just do all this stuff it's kind of dehumanizing, in my opinion. If somebody wants to do that and it's an option, that's one thing. But when you're like, okay, in order to get this grant, you got to let us come here and videotape you and do this and do that. I think that there's a lot of things that people feel like they want to show that they're giving money instead of, just helping out the organization. I also think there's a lot of accessibility issues. Like Yellow said, there shouldn't be like a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Everyone didn't learn English as the first language. Everyone can't read. Everyone can't afford a grant writer. And so if you have all these grants where they're all in English, there's no different language, you have to write a 20-page essay on why your organization needs this. You have to turn in all this different paperwork. There's going to be a lot of organizations that just aren't able to do that.
I love the way this conversation is going. I'll share that in the last few years, maybe since COVID or shortly before, our organization shifted to trust-based philanthropy. And so we changed our application completely to shorten it, We changed our reporting from a written report to a conversation where the community investment officer takes the notes and I just have a couple of questions that we send ahead of time so that we're not like catching anybody off guard. We're not asking for any extra data, and really opened up our grant making to general operations so that it's not programming. It can include staffing. It can include whatever other things are needed, and are truly diving into you as a leader. Tell us what you need, and send us a budget that works for you, that you already have, that's not something to fit into a structure or a format that we want.
I just want to say I love that so much, Lily, and that's definitely the framework that we at Beam are work through as well. Because recognizing that, Beam, we're a small organization, right? We're like $2.7 million a year, right? But the people that we support, the institutions and people we support, are often social workers who are in the church in Alabama, yoga teachers who are trying to do work in rural Kentucky. They're much smaller entities. And so recognizing how are we don't want to belabor them because they're doing the critical work that we know will not be seen by big foundations, right, and entities. How do we build relationships with them and make sure they get resources in ways that feel aligned and in partnership and in support, and not overburden them? That's just a big part of what I think we have to really shift with the philanthropy and foundation model.
What's interesting with all of this, the thing that comes to mind is that one of the challenges is really the zeitgeist, the way in which the American experience is framed, bootstraps, pull yourself up, do what you have to do, rest is for the weak, all those, axioms that lend itself to people always feeling like they have to do more in order to get more. But then you're also in this space where this tension behind, just speaking from within philanthropy, you want to do the trust-based philanthropy, you want to do general operating, but then you have this reporting structure that is well, how many people did you serve? And how do we know that these dollars? And I think that's the moment I believe philanthropy in and of itself is really wrestling with. Some are doing great, love the Kalamazoo Foundation level, and some are really challenged with this idea because their boards are composite of business people. And that model is very much in line with the general way that America has gone about building wealth. And so until we as those that are on the ground, those that are supporting those on the ground, really do lift up and really do, in a sense, the revolution has to be televised so that those that are in power can see that the way in which business was done has to change in order for us to really move and build and grow the society that we want to see. And the line has to be drawn in the sand. Either you're with us or you're not. And if you're not, it's going to be very clear. And, how do we then begin to really root out those that are not about that life and really begin to wrap our arms around those that are in a way that can support the work and support our mission?
I was going to say, to your point about reporting and stuff, I feel that's where kind of relationship building with these organizations comes into play. I know, sometimes people worry about oh, what if the organization is lying? What is this? What is that? But I feel when you're building relationships, it's a lot easier for the organization to be honest with you. Also, if you offer them support, which I'm sure that we're all doing, asking them, okay, what's going on? What are your pain points? What do you need from me in order for you to get over those pain points? I feel a lot of times with organizations, when they might not be telling truths on reporting and stuff, they might be scared. They might be worried that their money's going to be taken away. Something might happen to their organization. I never feel it's coming, it's never coming from a place of malice. It's coming from a place of, I want to make sure that this organization is safe, that I'm able to still help this community. And so I think that funders, everyone needs to come together and they need to build these relationships and provide more support to these organizations so they can feel okay, yeah, actually, I was only able to help this amount of people. What should I do to help more people? Or, yeah, I only spent this amount of money. What can I do to use more to help the community?
I'll say this really quick. The question that I've been asking as it relates to my background is in out of school time. But I think it can be extended beyond. It's what would it take to really establish an equitable funding ecosystem where there are dollars at every range, there are supports at every range, that if there are dollars where there are hoops, it makes sense. but you reduce the amount of legwork, you reduce the hoops that are needed. Like, how do we ensure that those that have the resources can connect with those that don't have the resources in a way that allows for those that are doing the work to have the latitude at different stages of their organizational development? So that's my mission right now. What would it look like if we had an equitable funding ecosystem where if you serve 2 people, 10 people, or 200 people, there are avenues for you to be able to get the resources you need to do the work?
One thing I think about, and I often tell a lot of my, philanthropic partners, I'm like, a part of the partnership building is, and this is just me and my kind of grassroots approach. I'm like, pull up, bring your behind to the hood, sit up in the room, sit up in the space, and I don't know. I'm like, yeah. Come down to see what we're doing. And then you get to feel it and see it and know it, right? As opposed to knowing it theoretically, which is also very white approach. I'm going to write a paper about it and you don't know what it's like. Come see the work. And and particularly because you know that these foundations, y'all have the resources to fly you down here and come see the work. More so so come and if we're talking about building long-term partnerships, like with our grantees, when we're in the cities, we come and see what y'all are doing. We pulling up. We want to see, not to critique it, not to tell it that we think you can do it better, but to really understand where you're at and how our resources can further support you growing in your work. But that once again isn't plantation patriarchy, right? Plant philanthropy, right? It's not like we don't want to go in the field. We want to stay in the big house, right? But come out into the field and see what's going on.
Can I add something really quick? I love that relationships are being lifted. That has helped us make a couple of policy changes at our community foundation, because there were a couple of things that came out in that reporting conversation, right, in that reflection conversation, that would not have otherwise been discussed or written up in a report. And those conversations were then very important for us to look internally and make changes to our policies and be able to serve at a greater level in the community.
To keep this conversation going, we asked Yolo to share some of the ways BEAM activates a culture of well-being within the workplace. We asked our other guests to each outline their specific work and initiatives supporting rest and wellness for BIPOC-led organizations, leaders, and staff. Lily explains the Kalamazoo Community Foundation's Sustaining BIPOC Leaders Wellness Grants. And we start with Terry and Asia, highlighting the Well Fund, administered by COAC Detroit and supported by the Skillman Foundation.
I'll paint the outlines and Asia can dig into the filling in the gaps. The idea of the Well Fund, and Asia can help me with the acronym, but the Well Fund was designed around what would it take for emerging BIPOC leaders to get unrestricted funds that can support a few different efforts. 1, general operating dollars to help you support your organization. 2, leadership is a continuous process. It doesn't stop and end at any particular point. So how do we provide resources to leaders, BIPOC leaders, to help choose their own adventure as it relates to leadership development in partnership with a host, an ecosystem of supportive partners in that area? And then also around wellness, what would a project, if you had the resources to do a project around wellness, what could that look like? And again, it was over 4 organizations that where their revenues were 300,000 and under, because those are the ones that obviously they've got the capacity to do the work because they're bringing in resources, but there tends to be a ceiling that those organizations reach before they can get a grant from the Skillman Foundation, Kresge, McGregor, whatever, what have you. And so this was how do you begin to identify high capacity, high impact leaders, and then give them the resources they need to continue to grow and build their organization. And so it was a process. COAC is a known organization in the area of really working with grassroots organization, moving dollars out the door. And so my background in doing some of this small emerging grant work, don't like to call them small grants, all grants are great grants. Emerging grant work is really centered around that population, and it was something that the Skillman Foundation saw an opportunity to support. And so about $400,000 out to 9 organizations, and the work just kicked off this past fall. So Asia, what might I have missed?
That was pretty good. So yeah, the Well Fund grant program is supported by BIPOC-led nonprofits, like Terry said, served youth, ages 5 to 24. Not only did they receive, so we had 5 organizations that received 65K. Those were our Well Fund grantees. They also received, or in the process of receiving, capacity building support from Obsidia and BDAD, which is very important because, of course, we know that funding is important, but also helping these organizations build capacity, looking at these organizations, what are their pain points and what do they need assistance with. And then in addition to that, I do actually have a story. So, of course, the Well Fund is a part of, we did a lot of participatory grant making. So this wasn't something that me and Terry just did. It was Skillman, BDAD, YDRC, Transforming Power Fund, CDAD, and Youth. We came together and co-designed this program. In addition to that, we also had a selection committee that was made of 50% youth in addition to our advisory group. And so in our selection committee, I remember that we discussed, of course, the grantees, but a lot of the selection committee members also wanted to support more organizations. And so we kind of discussed ways and how can we support these 5 organizations, but also add more organizations to our list. And so we were able to give the 65K to each of the 5 organizations. And then we also had $12,500 to 4 additional organizations. And that was unrestricted funding that they can use for whatever. And that made a really big impact to those organizations. I remember at the celebration, one of the organizations came up to me and they said, "Oh yeah, I received my funding. I already used it for 3 events." Like they were really excited to get that funding. So without that participatory approach, without bringing in everyone together to discuss the selection of these organizations, that wouldn't have happened.
And just really quick, the participatory part was important because we know that those that choose where the dollar comes from is where the power can land. And so it didn't need to be with the Skillman Foundation. It needed to be rooted in the community so that organizations like the Black Executive Directors Alliance of Detroit, BDAD, Youth Development Resource Center, the YDRC, those entities are the ones that are closest to the organizations. They had the understanding of what was needed. And in partnership with COAC, in partnership with the selection committee, was excited to see how the process played out, because it would have looked totally different if it was something that was internal to Skillman. And how it played out is something that I believe truly helps to build commitment, not just to the work, but really to how the work was funded and to the principles behind how it was funded. And that is how you continue to grow a community's commitment to a way of being, a way of thinking, and a way of supporting each other in this work.
And sorry, I just wanted to rename all the organizations because I think I forgot one. So I want to make sure everyone gets their flowers. So we have Skillman, YDRC, BDAD, Transferring Power Fund, and CDAD. There we go. Okay, got them all. And then we had our youth advisory group and then our 50% youth on selection committee.
Yeah, I want to speak to some ways in which we at BEAM are trying to cultivate wellness in our institution. And some of them align with what Lily was sharing earlier, right? We have had a 4-day work week since actually the top of this year. So we started piloting this year. So we are Monday through Thursday. In addition to that, we do close for a summer, fall, and winter paid break. So in the summer, we shut down after our mental health summit. And then we have a week in the fall, then 2 weeks in December leading up to the new year. And so those are some of the practices that we put in place that we know help people cultivate wellness. We also make sure in our wellness policy, but I can't remember the exact amount, my people, culture, and HR person would know, but we mandated that you have to use your time before the year is up, which maybe would be like, oh, I got to take some down. I'm like, yes, you got to go rest. You got to pay your time. And I encourage people to use it because now they're like, towards the end of the year, they're like, you know what? I need to take a couple of weeks. Like, yes, because you got the time and you will lose it if you don't use it. And because some people we recognize will just accumulate and never take time off, and they experience all this duress. And the saying that this is the cutoff makes people feel like, oh no, I really need to take it, and they really appreciate it, right? So thinking about that, there's some of the things that we do that we have the privilege of doing right now, right? We have a ceiling floor at our organization. We don't hire anybody for less than $60,000, right? That's the base, right? We want to raise that to 75, right? Make sure that people are getting living wages so people are feeling comfortable and able to do their work sustainably and be supported, right? And so those are some of the things that we think about, like in just in the structure. And one of the things that I was really intentional about in terms of the structure to create wellness is that I also was intentional about that every year there's an executive director review that all the staff participate in when they talk to the board. Right? Because what happens in a lot of institutions that I've been about, and the executive director keeps that space between him and the board and the staff separate, or him or her, And then there's all this kind of stuff that maybe the executive director is not cultivating very well or holding well, that never gets communicated to the board. A different vision gets to them, and that fosters on wellness too. So how are we creating more cross communication across the organization and accountability, so that like I know that I know that I'm not at this meeting where the board's going to talk to my staff, and so that's going to make me think about how I'm showing up, right? So I'm like, okay, let me check myself, right? You know what I mean? And also hold me accountable in ways that need to be addressed. So there's also like those kind of mechanisms being put in place to ensure structural integrity and ongoing kind of checking in and opportunities for the people just to continue to cultivate wellness.
And I'll share our initiative, the initiative that I lead. Pre-pandemic, we were seeding funds for executive coaching for leaders of color. And then in the throes of the pandemic, as we saw how stretched us as folks of color were, especially leaders who were providing direct work in the community, we shifted those grants, which are called the Sustaining BIPOC Leader grants. We shifted them to be wellness grants, also professional development, but primarily wellness. And we just asked leaders to tell us what they needed to be well. And we define leadership broadly. So if you're a coordinator, you can apply for funding. If you are a community organizer, you can apply. So it doesn't have to be positional leadership, like you're the executive director or CEO. Whatever leadership looks like at your structure, and you're a leader of color in our county, you can apply for funding. And so these grants are smaller grants, up to $3,000, that can be awarded directly to an individual. And so this also led us to change policy internally, because prior to these grants coming out, we were only funding grants to nonprofits and those organizations that have a fiscal sponsor, right? But through this work, we were able to change our policies to also grant directly to an individual as long as it is being used for a charitable purpose, right? And so this year we doubled basically in number of applicants, and we awarded $80,000 in partnership with the Consumer Energy Foundation. They provided us with a grant, and this is also the second year in a row that they contribute to our grant. It is through one of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. But essentially, these grants came about to support leaders in the community that we are seeing are doing amazing work, and their organizations don't have the resources to offer them additional time off or pay for a wellness practice. And so we got requests from people who were looking to pay for a gym membership, or do like a meditation or a yoga practice, or someone who wanted to go to a conference, but their work didn't have enough funds to send them off. And then at the end, I sent out a survey that was like the reporting process, just asking the leaders, how did this impact you? How did it sustain your leadership? And we get a lot of profound stories from people who said, I was able to, get a gym membership at the Y that included swim time with my family, and it allowed me to experience joy and to see my children and just do that activity together. We had someone who said that their blood pressure went down because they were able to incorporate this practice, and they never really had that intentionality before or been able to do it, and just really saw a lot of the data coming from leaders, qualitative data, where they are highlighting that impact in their personal life. Somebody said, this has helped me be a better partner, a better parent, because I'm able to regulate myself, to not feel so depleted. And I think that all of those pieces were just really wonderful to see. And, we'd hope to be able to continue to expand the funds in this bucket to continue providing resources.
Funding wellness is necessary, especially for many BIPOC-led organizations, leaders, and staff. However, how can we make a lasting cultural shift from burnout to wellness? I asked our guests to share more in their final remarks.
I think that we need to start with mindset. Everyone, pretty much our society's mindset has to change. I can't remember who mentioned it, but we talked about how we're in a society where you got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and you got to work harder and overwork yourself and take all the overtime and all that. And that just has to change. We need to change that mindset to being more wellness centered and taking care of yourself, taking care of whatever wellness means to you. In addition to that, I think that we, organizations, people in general, need to get not only funding for wellness, but also support with wellness. Like on the organizational level, I feel like organizations need to receive more capacity building support, assistance with how to use how to use funding, or different ways that organizations can receive support for the pain points that they might be having.
I would say I would love to see us, when I say us, nonprofit institutions organize collectively to challenge and speak out against the issues that we experience with philanthropic institutions, right? What would it mean for us to all, across the United States, for nonprofits to sign a statement that says this is what we experience from foundations and entities and what we are no longer interested in being a part of. And this is what we have a vision for, trust-based philanthropy being a part of it. There's also other frameworks as well, like really organizing, recognizing our collective power, because we make them sustainable. We make them look good, right? And then so if you want to be in partnership with us and be a part of this amazing work that we're doing, then you have to show up and look different and do work differently. And how do we support each other in making those demands? I understand that's a very privileged place to be in and a very, very difficult and nuanced place to be in. I think some institutions have the power to do that, and some institutions will feel very weary about that. But, I'm always just like I tell people with therapy communities when they're going to therapy, I was like, you got to remember, a therapist works for you. You pay them, right? This is a partnership. So don't go in there afraid to ask questions. And just like we need to think about with these foundations, yes, we're getting resources from them, but this is a mutually beneficial relationship, right? It's helping it's helping support your efforts too. And that means you need to be thoughtful in terms of what I get when I come to this table from you and our dynamic.
I would add that whatever it is, it has to be systemic and has to be equitable, right? So different sectors having some kind of a wellness space or time for rest or whatever wellness means to them, that it's not something prescribed that is set forth by the organization necessarily, and that it's just systemic in nature. Because I really love what you said earlier, Yolo, that we can address some of the need right now, right? That basic need. But if it doesn't go into the systemic component, then we may not see the change long term.
I had a totally different answer, and then Yolo got radical. So I'm going to put on my organizer hat and say that really what is needed is a collective vision for what we want to see for our young people, for ourselves as workers, for ourselves as organizational leaders of organizations. What would it look like if we were to flip the dynamic? If philanthropy were to step in the gaps and support in ways that really help to accelerate the growth of organizations, of leaders, of young people, instead of inhibiting it. What does a collective funding structure look like? Just like philanthropy benefits, business benefits, schools benefit, the system benefits. Somebody benefits from the work that nonprofits do. So how do we collectively come together and support the organizations, the ecosystems in a way that allows for that benefit to expand and accelerate across? And I think for philanthropy, what I would say is, how do you bake those dollars? How do you add those dollars into our grant making? So it's not saying, before we gave you 100,000 and then we gave you an additional 25 to do some wellness. How do you begin to just give $125,000 and it's general operating? How does that just become a part of how the philanthropic institutions provide resources to organizations? It's not a either or, it's a both and that we begin to truly be the supportive partner that I believe all of us aim to be. How do we do that in a way that could be responsive? Because it was cool to do unrestricted grant making in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, and for a lot of organizations, it's now going back to the way things were. How does the community, how do the nonprofit ecosystem come together in a way to say, no, this is what we're about? How do you work with us in a way that supports all of our collective efforts and what we want to see?
Thank you to all of our guests. Yolo Akili Robinson, founder and executive director at Beam. Learn more at beam.community. Lily Salas, Community Investment Officer at Kalamazoo Community Foundation. Find out more at kalfound.org. Terry E. Whitfield, Partnership Manager of Policy and Systems at the Skillman Foundation. Learn more at skillman.org. And Asia Blaney, Grants Program Manager at COAC Detroit. This has been the Natural Collisions Podcast from COAC Detroit.